Be nice, man.
Oh, I will. Hey, got Tierre Caldwell in the house, and just kind of like wanted to hear you roll with your experiences in the criminal justice system, and just tell us what that's like.
Um, it was life altering. I wasn't quite prepared for it, but it was honestly I remember being involved in situations where I felt like it was like this must be how slavery felt like.
Mm.
Like just being told to like you guys can come here and then you can sit now, you can stand now, undress, get dressed, then the labor, and then the wages we were paid, being told to drink brown water, being told to drink brown water.
You were at Faribault?
I was at Faribault, St. Cloud, and Stillwater. Yep. Just being told to, eat moldy food and serve moldy food. It was real dehumanizing, to say the least.
Yeah, I was telling somebody the other day, I spent 2 terms in federal prison, and it wasn't until I got to the state of Minnesota that I felt more humiliated than I've ever felt my entire life.
Absolutely.
Going through the prison system. It's something about the way they do it, They do it in such a nice way, but then they make you feel so bad at the same time. They call you Mr. and this superficial politeness, but it's so evil and so sinister. And I was telling somebody the other day, and I think one of the reasons why they get away with it like that is because they do it in such a niced up way, the Minnesota way, which is so cold and calculating. But yeah, finished though.
No, I mean, I completely agree. It wasn't, it was kind of, I wouldn't say it was nice. It was just, it's degrading when you, because you still have to keep your dignity about yourself. And you go from being, I went from being Tierre Caldwell to 233828. And you have to get used to being treated like a number. When and it hurts even worse when your friends and your family start treating you that way too, or your fake friends, I should say, because your real friends wouldn't do that. But yeah, I went through a lot of changes, just dealing with how people received you. And anytime you spend in that environment, it can kind of alter someone's entire perception of you. Even if you've completely changed, paid your debt to society, and you've, you could have been, found religion, found a new peace of mind. Like it does not matter. Once they hear you were there,
right?
Then it's just like, oh. And they associate you with every single bad thing that has to do with prison. Even with getting charged, my charge was for the benefit of a gang. And my crime didn't have anything to do with a gang. But the prosecutor used like a scorched earth type of tactic, and they were able to attach this gang injunction to my charge, and I had to take responsibility for all of the activities that a gang does in a certain demographic in my neighborhood.
Did you have co-defendants?
No.
You mind telling us what the nature of this whole thing was?
It was a first-degree assault for the benefit of a gang. And But as I said, it had nothing to do with the gang.
How were they able to tie that in, though?
Because it was really just like word of mouth in the neighborhood. Like I had family members who were involved, and so they attached my name with that, but they didn't. You know, the state of Minnesota, theoretically, you have to prove that you are in a gang. And how the benefit of a gang statute works is 3 or more people together committing a criminal act. That constitutes a gang. So, I mean,
It's an enhancement factor too, right?
that gave me 2 extra years by itself. Just that with the assault. And they just, and the prosecutor was able to say, well, this particular gang, they steal cars, they sell drugs, they kill people, they rob, they loot, they shoot, and Mr. Caldwell's a part of this. And the jury is like, oh my God. Well, even if he's innocent of what he's charged for, he's still a part of this, so he has to be guilty. If not on this level, then maybe on that level or this level. But if this is my first time meeting this guy, and the first thing I know about him is he's a gang member, he has to have done something. You have to do something bad to be in a gang. And so, and then the jurors even admitted they didn't even understand gang culture. So here I am being judged by 12 people on a gang case who had no idea about gang culture. And, you know, that was
How much time did you get for that?
I got 7 years, a total of 110 months.
Yikes.
I had to do. I mean, that's my sentence in total, is 110 months.
You know, if I could just say a little something, you know, it's funny because I first came to the state of Minnesota. I was visiting, and I ended up getting in some trouble. It was I caught a federal case up here, so I was headed back to California. I was getting back with my wife, and I got pulled over. This is in Arizona. That year, this is 1977, was the year that NCIC went national. There used to be you could go from state to state, felonies wouldn't follow you. That year is when they went national. So anyway, they extradited me back to Minnesota. And you know, the funny thing is, the prison experience wasn't that bad. I was at Sandstone. Matter of fact, they had nicknamed it Club Fed. They had Olympic-sized swimming pool. For real, had an Olympic-sized swimming
I heard that
pool.
before too.
Yeah, a tennis court. You wouldn't believe it. And so they had programs for you. Like when you got out, they had an organization up here called WHO, Women Helping Offenders. And what they would do is, women that got out of Shakopee, they would give them a car. They had all of this stuff. They had jobs. You wouldn't believe it. But see, I left Minnesota. I just came back about 10 years ago and has noticed how it's morphed into the crushing system that it's become, because you weren't really stigmatized. There was a guy, I don't know if you guys ever heard of him. His name is David Pettiford. He had just gotten out of prison. You know David Pettiford? Yeah, he had just gotten out of prison and got a job, you know, working in the prison system. You know, I wasn't really interested in working back in those days. You know, I was just full hustle. But I mean, they had jobs up here in the state of Minnesota. It's like back in the late 70s. And so, but like I said, I noticed this culture has crept in up here that is really so humiliating and so devious. You know, and all the money that's being spent just erroneously incarcerating people. I've just really been trying to research how that whole thing changed. You know, they still have this so-called Minnesota nice on one hand, but then they have this other part that's really so sinister and so cruel on the other hand, you know.
I agree, and I mean, you know, it's Minnesota nice, But I mean, that's how your oppressors are supposed to be if they want to keep you oppressed. Like Khalid Muhammad said, I mean, when they came to Africa, they came with smiles. You know what I'm saying? Like they came talking nice, and so it's a vicious cycle. And I mean, even in some of these meetings, they talk nice,
Mm-hmm.
but talk versus action is two different things.
Exactly.
Um, and I mean, I'm to the point to where um, I really being in the system from that side,
Mm-hmm.
and then seeing how things are done on the legislative side. Um, we have to be present, and not only present, but we have to be a part of it
Mm-hmm.
in a major way. There's so many laws that get changed. There's a lot of people that complain about the laws, and oh well, man, this is. But yet and still, we're not on these boards. We're not properly represented on these boards. But a lot of it is due to not being aware.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm glad that this year and last year, pretty much since my return, I've been trying to be as actively involved as I can. I can't be involved in everything, obviously, but it's been a real eye-opener, to say the least, because it's so easy to get excluded.
Mm-hmm.
And how it works is if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, basically. And we've been on the menu for a while.
Yeah, that's true. That is so true.
So,
How do you think we can engage people to become more involved?
know your legislators, and participate. Get involved in your community at the local level and at the state level, and even on the federal on all levels. I don't really entertain people who complain about how things are if you just sit and whine
Right.
and don't get up and get involved. I think the main thing is just being together.
Mm-hmm.
Moving as a unit, voting as a unit, and attacking problems as a unit. I think that would help. That would be a lot more help. And then having adequate representation at these tables and at these meetings, and listening to the people who are inside.
Mm-hmm.
Once you're inside, like, people just forget about you.
That's true.
And I know that firsthand.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of people inside who are getting mistreated, who are getting humiliated. There's a lot of people on parole who are getting mistreated and humiliated,
Mm-hmm.
and getting sent back just because their agent may have had a bad day.
Yeah.
And even in the institutions, if some of them have bad days in there, then they do the same thing.
Yeah, I was telling somebody just today, those ISR agents are a carbon copy of those cops inside,
Yeah.
If they, was telling somebody a story, I was walking up the hall one time. I was at Moose Lake, and there was an attractive guard, everybody was oohing and ahhing about her. I intentionally wouldn't look at her because she felt like she was all that, she struts up and down the hall. So, a friend of mine, he actually turned around. We was going to chow. He actually turned around and looked at her. There was another cop behind her. What are you looking at? They ended up putting him in the hole. I don't know what the charge was, but I told him, I said, shucks, this is like being back in Arkansas back in the 50s,
Yeah.
where I can't look at somebody, reckless eyeballing, But they will lock you up on a whim. And these ISR agents remind me so much of those cops inside, because I've been written up for almost nothing, where they have a thing called LOP, loss of privileges. You can't use the phone, you can't do nothing, you got to lock yourself down, and just for silly, crazy stuff. I dropped a book one time while I was running inside my cell to keep from getting, and I ended up getting a 3-day LOP behind it, behind this one cop. I don't know what her problem was, she would just always harass me for nothing, and could get away with it. and there's nobody to appeal to, and that's a real bad part about this system. There's no appeal process, you know. The kite system, they tell you, oh, write a kite, because they know the thing is worthless, you know. By the time you write a kite, you get it back, the thing's all over with anyway. It's crazy, you know.
I think I agree with that. I think to follow up on your previous question, I think that the issue of mental health in the system is number one, is criminalized. There's a lot of people who are criminalized for having a mental illness.
Yeah.
And they're placing people who they're making people responsible for inmates who have mental illnesses, who have zero training in mental illness at all.
Right.
And so when if, say, just using me, like if I have a mental illness and I have this particular condition and I act out through that condition, and you just interpret that as, you know, me violating or trying to be disrespectful, and even culturally competent, trauma-informed training. I mean, there's a big gap with that. How can someone, and this is no disrespect to anybody's ethnicity or anything or culture, but how can somebody who's white, who's lived in like a suburban community, tell somebody of African American descent that they can't attend an Afrocentric treatment facility,
Right.
or an Afrocentric, you know, program? Like how can you do that, or what? And it's being done. It's I've experienced. You know, men, you know, I'm an employment navigator for the Power People Leadership Institute, the largest and most successful reentry group in Minnesota.
I like the way you say that.
I said successful reentry group in Minnesota. And, you know, we have men who are harassed on so many different levels. And I ask them, like, well, why can't we just go to Turning Point? Why can't we go here? Why can't we go there? Because they feel like they're being misunderstood, and like me, I'm like we just talked about on the Al McFarland show. I talk with my hands a lot,
Right.
and to some people that's threatening, but to me it's normal. And so, I think a large part of these agents, they don't try to get to understand the person's trauma. They don't try to get to know them. They don't try to understand what they've been through. And if you can't identify with my trauma, how can you even make a decision based off of, you know, like I could be acting out from something that happened years ago in my childhood that's just unresolved. You know what I'm saying? But on the surface, it may come out a different way.
Exactly.
But if you've never took the time to peel those layers back, then you would never know.
Yeah, and we're being judged based on that, you know. Who's got some questions for Brother Tierre? Come on. All right, we got a question over for Sister Stephanie.
Just can I ask, what kind of situations did you deal with on a day-to-day? You mentioned you were in 3 facilities. You said Rush City, Stillwater, and St. Cloud.
Yeah.
Can I ask, what kind of issues did you deal with, like day-to-day, and like how do you feel like did those day-to-day kind of issues you was dealing with, did they make you stronger, or did they set you back? Like, was it a combination of both? Was it just like a lot of extra stuff that you shouldn't have been dealing with, or like, yeah?
That's a very good question. Honestly, to be 100% honest, I dealt with a lot of feelings of powerlessness, which was a feeling that I've never experienced before.
Right.
Because, I mean, not to sound macho or nothing, but I'm a man. I'm used to always being in control. I'm used to always running stuff. And there, I was just stripped away from everything. and a large part of it was I had to get in tune with myself emotionally. When I went in there, I came in there very arrogant, very conceited. I had a lot of pride. I had a lot of ego, and but I was emotionally, my emotional intelligence was very low. But being that I was so conceited and arrogant and narcissistic, I thought it was high. You know, just being so self-absorbed, not really realizing how what little self-awareness I had at the time. But yeah, just dealing with feelings of powerlessness, man, and as a man, being forced to deal with emotions. I didn't have anything I didn't have an escape anymore. I didn't, out here we can just self-medicate. We can go somewhere else. We can go to somebody else's house. In there, you just stuck with your emotions, and you just have to deal with it. And it was either going to make me or break me. So I think a large motivating factor that got me through was Shane Price, God, and my two boys sitting right there. King Mason and Josir.
King Mason, what's your question, young man?
What has changed in your past life and your new life?
One thing that has changed in my past life and my new life, that's a good question, son. A very tough question, but it's a good
He's
one.
got him. He can't even answer it. Look.
I know. I mean, if I could be honest,
You want to come up here?
If I could be honest, I'm looking at it. You are what's changed. Just having you in my life, it tore me away. It tore me up being away from you. I think you know that because I tell you that all the time. But, and I tell you guys this all the time. You guys know I didn't have a dad. And, I never, ever wanted to be away from you guys. And I didn't want you guys to ever think that I felt it was okay to be away from you guys. Because you guys are so special to me. And I love you guys. And so, but I also, I had to become a better man. You know what I'm saying? And I had to be a better father for you. So, because back then, Daddy was a little wild, but Daddy's better now. You know what I'm saying? So that's what's changed. I try to live a life that you guys can look up to. That's a positive life. Amen. And, try to show you guys how to be leaders and men, be active in your community, and be respectful, be smart, and, live a God-fearing life. So that's pretty much, does that answer the question? Okay.
How did your father's being away impact you guys? How does his being away, how did that affect you?
I felt different in school. I felt like I was the only one that did have a dad that was really there. Everybody had one. Then I just felt left out.
You still feel like that? Good.
Boy. So.
Yeah. And that was the one feeling that I really didn't want them to go through because I've experienced that. And I'm actually about to go see my dad.
How are you?
Yeah, Tuesday.
Where is he?
He's in California.
Oh, what part?
San Diego.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm about to go see him, and it's kind of a interesting conversation when I talk about all I went through with my boys to him. when I talk about, you know, the struggles I faced inside being away from my kids, and then him listening and knowing he's never been there for me purposely. And so it's a weird dynamic. And I used to hold a little bit of like grudge against my dad for that. But I had to realize like that was baggage that I was carrying around. And once I just kind of just let that go, I was able to receive him on a different level. But I never wanted that little animosity.
When was the last time you saw him?
2017.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, we talk every couple of months. We're not like how me and him are, but I mean, the love is there though.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? So.
That's good. Well, how do y'all want to close this out? Any more questions? I would like to tell you about a humiliating experience that I had in answer to your question. And it has to do with, that's why I can feel these sisters' pain with CIP. Now, I was arrested November 2010. I was living in Fargo. And I had an open warrant here. And I lived between Fargo and, Moorhead was the next city over. And it's right on the border of Minnesota. So it was about a week before Thanksgiving. And a friend of mine came by and brought me a bunch of food stamps. Went shopping. Never ate a shred of that food. Matter of fact, I walked out of my apartment and never came back, literally. So the week before, we had a gun show. I'm a veteran, so we had a gun show. I had a gun in the car, and I forgot. I just bought a brand new Infiniti. There was a friend of mine, he wanted to drive it. So he's driving. As soon as we cross the bridge over in the Moorhead, there's a police sitting there. So I tell him, knowing I got a warrant, I've been skipping this warrant. This warrant was about 10 years old. Go this way. No, if I go that way, they're going to know something. He stops right in front of the police. Now, we got a car full of people. Female turns around, looks at him. He told me later on, I got leery when she turned around and looked at me. So he runs the plate, figures, hey, he got the warrant, so he got a hit. I goes to jail. Never came back to my apartment. I lost everything I had. What really bothers me about that whole experience is that I was the only one that had pictures of my mom, my grandmoms. Yeah, I had those pictures over 40 years. Lost all of it. I didn't care about the little furniture and stuff that I had, Anyway, so I was tested by the VA. I had a full physical done. And they said, hey, you're okay. So when I get to Faribault, I'm training for the boot camp program. So you got to do this insanity tape, you got to run a mile. It's Mickey Mouse stuff, I did all of that. So they brings me to Moose Lake. Moose Lake is right up the road from the CIP camp. So I goes up there. This was in March of 2013. So what happens is all the guys that went up there with me, they're going on to boot camp. So they don't call me. And I noticed, they're not calling my name. So I wrote to the medical department. So they tell me, they says, well, you're going to be seen, just wait till we see you. Now, prior to that, I had heard about this doctor. We called her Dr. Death. Her real name was Dr. Sharon Barney. She killed 3 inmates up there. Lo and behold, that's who I go in front of. So I go in there, and a friend of mine had told me how bad she was. I didn't believe it. I said, nobody could be like. So when I go in there, she's like, you're the worst CIP candidate I've ever seen. I said, what are you talking about? Huh? So she's telling me, she says, well, you have a thyroid condition. I said, a thyroid condition? I said, I was just checked by the VA 2 months before I was arrested. How do I don't have a thyroid condition. She made me take thyroid medicine. And it put me in a hypo state because my thyroid was okay. The medicine. So anyway, what ended up happening was I stopped taking the medicine. So in retaliation, she takes me off. I was taking lisinopril for my high blood pressure. So as punishment, she takes me off all of that. So every time I would write the medical board, every time I would write the medical department, Just follow just follow her orders. Just do that. So one day I'm going to chow, and I'm so dizzy I pass out. So next thing I know, I'm sitting up against the wall, and everybody's passing by. Everybody's asking me what's wrong. The cops got me, and then they called the paramedics. So my blood pressure, they said I should have been a dead man. Why aren't you taking your blood pressure medicine? I said, I've been trying to. That's the only way that I got this high blood pressure medicine back to where I was being able to take it again. She had me off this stuff for 7 months. I wrote the medical board that oversees them. You know what they wrote me back and told me? Oh, she was right in telling you you shouldn't take those meds. I said, you guys are crazy. And so that's the system that we're dealing with. All of them are in cahoots and complicit with each other. Everybody you complain to, they're all consorting with each other to make sure that the status quo is maintained. And that's what we're fighting against now. You know, I did want to leave on a light note. What you got to say, young man?
I got to say that.
Speak up.
I gotta say that was pretty harsh, what I heard.
Yeah, this is an intelligent, sensitive young man.
Yeah.
It is harsh, and you know, we don't want you to go through any of this. If there's any lesson out of all of this.
Oh, well, tell them what you're going to be when you grow up.
I'm gonna be a police officer.
I knew you were going to say that, and I pray that you do your community some good, young man.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And he's going to be one of the good ones.
Yeah, that'd be so great.
We need more like him.
Yeah. All right. Did you want to say more, or you want to leave it there?
Good.
All
Did you
right.
have something else you wanted to say, son?
That's all right, man. I'm proud of you. That's good. That's a good, noble profession if you can carry it out the way it's supposed to be carried out.
Oh,
You
he
know.
will.
Yeah. And I'm sure he will, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, folks. Who's next?